Welcome to Nuuness TV, a web series where leading ladies in athletic performance discuss the truths, challenges, and opportunities in being an active female participant in sport. I'm Emma Coburn, Olympic steeplechase medalist and your host for Nuuness TV.
Meet Dr. Stacy Sims. Stacy is author of the book Roar and currently a research scientist at the University of Waikato. Her research is specialized in human performance, specifically in the sex differences in training and nutrition. Stacy's vision of the world is a place where healthy women understand their bodies, train with their unique physiology, and create positive change around being a woman in sport. Stacy, it's great to have you on Nuuness TV. Before we get rolling, tell us about your background in sport and what sport looked like for you growing up.
I've had a convoluted route of sport because when I was little, it was more riding my bike in the neighborhood, right? It's the freedom. And then as sport developed, it was more running and then getting into more competitive rowing in university. And then merging into Ironman triathlon, but I still loved riding my bike. So then I was lucky enough to be picked up by a pro team to race in the States when I went to do my postdoc. And then it just kind of merged into doing a whole bunch of other stuff. So it's just been moving really my whole life.
This is a sidebar, but
Yeah.
During all of your studies and all that, how did you balance your competitive training and your, pro cycling and all of that with your academic career?
Poorly? Just kidding. No, I was lucky enough that when I was racing, teammates always had questions, or I was always trying to figure out how to do things better. And then having the availability to go into the lab or to question things and then be able to do the experiment was, I guess, a unique opportunity because I could take what was going on and then try to find the answer. So balancing it more of the fact that I wanted to find the answers for myself, being a bit selfish. But now that I've gotten out of racing and still being able to answer those questions for the plethora of other women is still a driving force.
What a great resource for your teammates. Oh my gosh, I'm jealous. So now you're gonna laugh at me. I'm trying so hard.
No?
Now you are a senior researcher at the University of Waikato.
Yes.
Waikato.
Say it faster, Waikato.
Waikato.
There you go.
Okay, I'm making this too complicated. Stacy, you are the senior researcher at University of Waikato.
Yeah.
Oh, that's still bad. Anyway, can you talk about that and what you work on and what that looks like for you?
So I'm at a satellite campus because the main campus is based in Hamilton, and I'm over.
That's an easier place to say.
Hamilton.
Yeah, I can say that one.
Yeah, Hamilton. And I'm at Mount Maunganui, housed in the Adams Center of High Performance. So it's a high performance center where we have the likes of the rugby sevens, and we have surf and climbing. So a lot of unique sports, cycling sometimes comes over, triathlon. So the athletes and the coach and management is all coming in, which still keeps us ingrained in what kind of conversations are going on or not having. And then the research aspect is more looking at low energy availability, menstrual cycle dysfunction, training with your menstrual cycle, OCP effects, or oral contraceptive pill effects on the elite female athlete. So it is, again, still in that same cadre of the questions are coming and what kind of research can we do to answer these questions quickly, or I have these questions and am I seeing it in the field as well?
And you still get to be plugged in so much with on the field of play and then also the research. What a great balance that is.
And being able to affect management, because management's housed there now that they've heard me for a couple of years going, women are not small men. It's uptake. So now I'm having the higher end coaches and management asking me, well, how do we better our female athletes?
That's great.
So it's good.
Glad you said women are not small men. That's your kind of claim to fame tagline. It's been so helpful for so many people to really understand and click with that women are different and there's needs that we have that men don't, and to really be specific to that. Talk about women not being small men and your studies in that and your discoveries in that. Beyond just the common sense.
Yeah, just beyond the common sense. So I think the tagline came because teaching university students are like whatever. But as soon as you open a lecture with, well, women are not small men, people are like, what do you mean? Of course they are. And then we start digging in and saying, well, if you look at the research science, almost everything's been generalized to women, but it's not applicable because from birth there are sex differences. And when I'm talking about women are not small men, I'm talking about the actual biological sex differences, not a gender construct. And we know the exposure of estrogen, testosterone in utero start different changes. And then at the onset of puberty, we see those changes with the dichotic switch of what happens with young boys when they expose to testosterone and what happens to young girls with estrogen and progesterone. And all of these changes really affect how we move, how we respond to adaptations, how we respond to exercise, what we eat, how we perceive ourselves within our sporting communities. So when I'm talking about women are not small men and how that drives research, it's because I want to know the answers specific to female physiology, because women work just as hard as men in sport. And
I think we work harder.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe we have to, right? Maybe you have to work harder because you're in this lens, this male lens, and training and everything has been done according to the male body. And women have to work harder because they're fighting against their own physiology. So my research and my goal is to look at physiology and be able to give women that extra 2% to be able to train appropriately with it, how their body responds at certain times of the month, how estrogen and progesterone affect adaptations, how you can use that to maximize training adaptations, to understand times of a menstrual cycle where maybe you should to just deload, but you can't organize races around it. So being aware of what happens, to be able to dial in interventions, or to be able to scope your training practice, to be able to get the most out of your training.
And was some of that research and kind of passion as you've continued in your career motivated by your personal experiences in sport as a woman, or is it?
Of course. I'm very motivated that way. I think early days, like I was a rower at university at Purdue, and we would have the same kind of training and same testing as the men, and the lightweight men's boat always kept progressing really well. And there would be times where our boat was a bit flat. And at the time I was also, in undergraduate and reading studies, hearing about studies, but nothing was really resonating as a female athlete. And so I'd ask those questions. It was like, well, how is this appropriate for a female athlete? And a lot of times I get told, well, women are an anomaly. This is just how it is. And this is the guidelines. And this is what comes out of it. We don't do research on women because it's too difficult. And throughout my whole career, I've heard this, well, why do you want to study women? We don't know enough about men. And those are like, factors where it's like, I'm not a guy. I don't respond the same. My teammates don't respond the same. So why are you telling me that I have to do X, Y, Z when there's no data to support it? Yeah.
That's so interesting. I definitely feel like in the running world, the standard is just women do 10% less than what the men do, but there are such differences in at least what I've noticed in my training career comparing to my male teammates over the years is the women, we have to kind of train closer to our race efforts and paces to improve, and the men, maybe it's because of their testosterone, you could teach me about that, but they can train at a dialed back level and then race really, really well. And my current coach, my husband, he gets that and he understands the differences, but I definitely think it's a totally missed concept for a lot of people, and especially young, high school, college, those experiences when a lot of the hormones and everything are so different. It's great that people like you are putting that out there, and you have a great book about it too, and might be creating more content, I would hope.
Yes, of course, yeah.
But so in your research, what are some of the big things that surprised you, or did anything surprise you? Was all of it just like, aha, like, duh, of course I've been feeling this and now I have the science to back it up, or were some of your findings totally surprising?
Combination, I think. It's like women, we always, well, I shouldn't say we always, but for the most part, there's that self-doubt. why am I not hitting this the way I should? I felt so great yesterday or 2 days ago. Is it something I didn't eat? I didn't recover well. I didn't get enough sleep. So a lot of those metrics come through, but really it's just an affect of your physiology. Could be you felt really great 2 days ago because you had the surge of estrogen around ovulation and you can really hit it hard and recover well. And now you're starting to get in the point where estrogen and progesterone are coming up. So your metabolism changes, your mojo is kind of off because of changes in neurotransmitters. And not understanding that and fighting back against it, trying to really self-doubt comes into play. So when you're doing research and understanding it and going, oh, well, yeah, that makes total sense now. And then when we look at, there's so many aspects of women who are, oh, I need to cut body weight, I need to lose weight, I need to cut back on calories and increase my intensity. And then we get into this low energy state. And the result of that is putting on more body weight and getting slower. And then eating more is actually the way you come out of it. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily an aha, but you're like, shit, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And seeing it written on paper, it's so much easier to communicate that. And I appreciate when there is research and books that show that and teach that. I always had just a good relationship with food and a good relationship with my body and training, and felt like I was, athletic and could keep up with the boys. But a lot of the peers that I have in running weren't that way, and they unfortunately slid into a lot of those misconceptions and habits and in those relationships with food that are so scary and dangerous. And it's not until you really see it kind of on paper that you know that it's that you can tell, like, see, this is right.
This is what you need to do. Yeah.
That's so, yeah, I so appreciate you for that. What are some of the misconceptions about female athletic performance? You touched on it about, if you dip down a couple days, people think it's about sleep or eating or whatever, but it's actually, your cycle and your hormones. What are some other misconceptions?
I think some of the ones that are coming out now, like amenorrhea or not having your period, is a sign of you're training hard enough, or you're at a point where you're just on that cusp where you're going to perform really well. There was a conference where one of the coaches...
people think that if you lose your period, you're about to run really well?
Yeah. So it came up in a conference where, like, we know that women are going to lose their period right before Worlds or something. And it's that misconception that's really out there, like, if I'm amenorrheic, then that means I'm training hard enough. But we know that you need to have your period to be healthy. Mm-hmm. And trying to get that across to so many people, if you lose your period, you're not a healthy athlete. If you're a healthy athlete, then your training is going to work for you. You're going to adapt. So that messaging is one that keeps coming up a lot, where missing periods or menstrual cycle dysfunction is a sign that your endocrine system, something's not in balance. And that is pervasive from young female athletes all the way up through until, like, the onset of perimenopause. Then everything's a little bit messy. But so if you're eating and fueling for what you're doing, then you're going to take care of your health needs and your training needs. And getting rid of that message of I don't have my period is a good thing, and replacing it with your period is an ergogenic aid. And if you don't have it, then it's time to investigate, is one that, with Mary Kane stuff coming out, right, we really need to push that messaging forward. Mm-hmm.
I know it's been so interesting just as a consumer of news and content to see the trend in media and athletes and research and having that discussion, because I do think years ago it was a little taboo and people didn't, want to maybe talk about it, but it's been so refreshing that people are talking about it and educating people.
Yeah.
What are some of the, like, diet related to food? What are some of the diet or food trends that are current, that are terrible, or ones that are great, or ones that you're happy to see being talked about, or ones that you want to be put to bed?
I want intermittent fasting and ketogenic diet just to be out of the athletic population, especially for women.
For sure.
Intermittent fasting from a health standpoint, right, is useful. But when we look at the exercise data and the longevity data, if you're layering on exercise to intermittent fasting, there's no additional benefit. And we know that exercise in itself is a fasted state. And when you put in high performing athletics into that, it just opens it up to a lot of endocrine problems. Because as women, we know that women do better when they are in a fed state. Because we have.
Can you repeat that? Women do better when they're
in a fed state. That's right.
Like, say it louder for those in the back.
Yeah, no, women need to eat just to keep everything in line, because we have kisspeptin, which is a neuropeptide, and it's more sensitive in women, and it's responsible for all of our endocrine function, for our sex hormones. And if it gets perturbed, then we have that feed forward effect of not having our sex hormones being released or produced or working for us. The ketogenic diet is very similar, and we know that there are outcomes in women that are different from men. So we hear about the cognition and focus that happens on a ketogenic diet. In men, yes, you have a parasympathetic increase, but for women, we have an increase in our sympathetic drive. So we're more anxious, we can't sleep very well, we just can't relax, we get a little bit more depressed.
And again, whenever you see headlines and clickbait on keto diet or whatever, it's saying all of the great things, but not saying that, oh no, if you're a woman, you might not respond similarly.
Exactly.
It's the classic women are not small men right
exactly. And it's the biggest backlash I get on social media. The keto works so well. Well, maybe for the first 3 months, because anyone following a diet for the first 3 months is going to find some kind of result. But the long-term effects is a very negative outcome for women. Increase of visceral fat, endocrine dysfunction. You have more psychosomatic disruption, more depression, and then you also have the backlash of subsequent fat gain. So we're looking at these trendy diets, and again, the original research on these were obese, clinically oriented men who needed to lose weight quickly for surgery. So when you pull it over to the exercise data, it just doesn't make sense. As for good diets, I don't know if there's any one in particular other than eat low on the food chain, right? Eat lots of colorful fruits and veggies. Don't rely on processed foods. It's just common sense, really.
Yeah, that's great. The misunderstanding of the female athlete anatomy, we just talked about that, is a big part of sport, unfortunately, and especially on the bottom entry level young girls. How can we do a better job of educating young women and young girls in sport about these differences and misconceptions, and how do we do that? Do we talk on Nuuness TV, or do we get it, coaching programs, or what is your technique? How do you do it?
So
you wrote a book?
I did write a book. The onset of puberty is a very difficult one, because we know that that's where a lot of girls will drop out of sport. And part of the issue is you look at what happens with the exposure of estrogen, progesterone in girls. They put on body fat. By the nature of that exposure, hips widen, so your Q angle, the angle between your hip and your knee, becomes wider. Your carrying angle becomes wider. So all your mechanics are different. So when you're running, your running form changes, more predisposed to injury. Swimming mechanics change, landing mechanics change. So everything becomes a little bit harder and more predisposed, like I said, more predisposed to injury. But if you look at a young boy who's going through puberty, they get leaner, they get fitter, they get faster, they get more aggressive. And so this difference in sport becomes really pragmatic right there, right? You see this diverge. And we don't train our girls how to rerun, how to re-swim, how to do proper jumping, what are our functional movements. And so they get slower, they get injured, they get disappointed, they drop out of sport. So at that critical moment.
Or they might take the unhealthy routes.
Exactly, of going into that low energy, eating disorders, all of that pervasive stuff. And if we just take that step back and say, well, we know that this is happening and we can't pinpoint the exact day this is going to happen because it's a wide range. If we just focus on the functional movement and reteaching fundamental skills, one is a really fantastic base for future sporting endeavors, regardless of if you pursue one particular sport or many others. It gives you that base strength, it gives you the base ability to understand your mechanics. And then it allows girls to get through this temporary blip in time where they are going to be a little bit slower and they're trying to adjust. So working with, again, these changes, and then on the other side of things is when they pick it up again. And it just helps throughout the board to have that education for our girls to know that they're going to put on a little bit of body fat, right? And their bodies are going to change. But giving them the tools to understand it and working with it. Yeah, and be okay with it and work with it gives them a sense of empowerment, which then feeds forward for future endeavors.
That's so great. I think I grew up playing multiple sports, and when I went through puberty, I had the blessing of I was only in a sport for 3 months, and then the next season, the next sport started, and then the next one. And so I think just by constantly kind of changing my physical activity in different sports, I accidentally ended up doing a lot of what you're saying of like kind of retraining functional movements and challenging myself in different ways. And I was lucky to not have much injury and to still have happiness in my sport and stuff.
Yeah.
But most young girls get, committed to whatever sport they're passionate about, and then they do it till their face turns blue and are so wrecked when something changes. And we're all going to go through it. We can't prevent it, so we might as well
Embrace it
and be proud of it, you know? So if we're able to educate young girls and their coaches and parents on how to, help girls get through that change, how do you think we can, or you can, change the landscape of sport for future female athletes and future generations? What do you hope that looks like one day?
I always look at it when I look at my daughter. She's 7 now. And I see changes on the playground of those who don't care about what happens. They just want to play. And I'd like to see that throughout, right? Because we do sport for play. And it's fun. And then it becomes this thing where we're so motivated, right? And we see success. So if I look from an educational standpoint, it needs to come from the grassroots, and it's getting rid of the patriarchal system of this is how it needs to be and this is the line we need to follow. Educating people that, girls and boys are similar, but then as we grow, we're different, and having the ability to have those conversations. And parents have a vested interest in their kids, so starting there. And then when we get into higher education, this is where a lot of the research misstep happens. Having really tight scientific designs, but that's going to have to start with things like guidelines for authors. So when you go to look at submitting a journal article, they have guidelines for authors to fit within the confines of what's going to be published. So if we could have, like in the guidelines for authors, did you check this out when you're studying women? Did you study women? And these are the procedures to really clean up scientific design so that when we go to educate, we have solid data to educate.
And then when a consumer is on Twitter scrolling, we don't just do the clickbait and fall for it because it'll be cleaner.
Yeah.
So what is one or two pieces of advice that you can tell the Nuuness community if they can do anything for their health, for their bodies? What would you tell? What would you tell them?
Right now, I think we are in that time of, I guess, the global realization that we can't generalize. So some of the biggest things, like biohacking, right? So you're keeping track of your menstrual cycle, understanding how you feel across your cycle with regards to training, how you're responding to training. And then if we're looking at a younger version of ourselves, right? Enabling them to feel the time and space and movement, and then encouraging new movement patterns to kind of get out of that focus on body image, but it's more the feeling of how you move. So I guess the pieces of advice really are understand who you are and how your body responds to things, because when you understand that, it gives you this sense of empowerment that you can really dial in your nutrition training to work best for you.
And yeah, what's right for you might not be the right thing for me, but
yeah,
it's if you understand yourself, you'll have confidence in that decision making. But your book is called Roar.
Yes.
And you can get it on Amazon. You can get it anywhere. I can't wait to read it myself. Thank you for being with us today. It was great talking to you. And tune in for the next episode of Nuuness TV.